something exciting happened on Tuesday.
Oh.
In that we had our city council meeting, and it was the first city council meeting for our three new council members, Sean Lololi and Katie Valenzuela and Mai Vang, and they were all sworn into office. In addition to them being sworn into office for the first time, we also had Mayor Daryl Steinberg as well as Councilmember Eric Guerra also sworn back into office because they are returning to their positions, and so a new term is beginning. And so that was super exciting on Tuesday. I definitely teared up a bit when I watched. Did either of you get a chance to watch?
I saw it. I definitely teared up during Sean Loloi. No, that's not true at all. No, it was, I think, yeah, obviously both Katie and my swearing in, it's emotional. It's a weird feeling seeing somebody not just that aligns with you politically, but who is, our age and who represents just like something totally different than what
who represents you, right? I mean, that's the quick of it, is that you like actually have somebody representing you on city council now who gives a shit about you and people like you.
It just didn't make it was hard to process in real time.
Nobody's used to it.
So like for Katie, a fellow unapologetic leftist, and then Mai was incredible. Like that's when I actually almost teared up, was when Mai spoke to her district in Hmong. It was, I don't even know how to describe it. It was really moving.
It was. I felt like I understood her. I do not speak Hmong, but Same. I definitely, as she was speaking, I was like, yes, exactly, right? And like there were these like various words in English peppered in, and that's not why I thought I could follow along. Like if those hadn't existed, I still would have felt like I heard in my soul, which like I felt like she was just speaking a heart language, and I was just following along because I was like, I know what you're saying, even though I don't understand a word that's coming out of your mouth. I just thought about how cool that would have been to be a person who has never heard their language spoken from, the virtual dais, but nonetheless from the seat of power in your city, and how cool that is. And I think it means a lot. I had the privilege of watching with some of the folks from the People's Budget. We were all on a Zoom, and we were definitely tearing up and cheering and, toasting to them and just really enjoying the moment of watching them speak to the values, like Dave was saying, that we share. I think what was really powerful for me was to have a council member talk about, good trouble, and call out activists, as bad people, but as the people who power this, this work, and call out the community and community voices, to watch, Mai be sworn in by her teacher, who is a Black woman who, taught her during school. It was just so powerful to see how different that was from how the swearing in, process often happens. And even though it was virtual, it still was quite powerful. So I'm just so excited for them.
Me too. I can't wait to see. I turned off the meeting after that because I was like, I can't take any more. I mean, I'm at my capacity.
Well, you actually missed something really cool, because one of the things that Katie brought up before the meeting was over was that she has heard some concerning things about the way that the police are regarding the counter protesters, and even the way that they're interacting with the white supremacists who have been descending on our city. And she wants a report at the first meeting in January from the police department on what's been going on. So,
let's fucking go.
And I was like, yes. I was like, step one, get in there and start calling out these issues from the dais. So it was nice to have somebody say that from the dais.
Believe it. Like, I can't even, can you fucking imagine?
To hear the word white supremacists from the virtual dais meant the world.
Hell yeah.
Like, I was like, So I more to come.
I'm addicted to this feeling. We got to look at 2022. I'm already thinking of like, we know Angelique is going for Dr. Pan's seat, so that leaves District 1 open immediately. There's a lot that could be done.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It
Yep.
really is, like, I don't know. So I missed it. I was having a socially distant dinner with my parents. And of course, like, politics is going to come up, and my folks are like maybe not quite as far to the left spectrum as I am, but they're cool. No doubt. But like, there's just like, if you on the federal level and kind of on the federal level of news in general right now, like, it's all pretty bleak, and there's not really a lot to celebrate going on right now. And I knew that this swearing in was happening, like, while I was having this conversation, and kept coming back to it and kept being like, this is the fucking light, like, there's federally, it's looking a little rough right now. We're kind of, the left has basically been taking L's for a while federally here on a number of levels, but like on the local level, and I'm so happy that in the local level of a city that I live in, things have just like seen a dramatic improvement. As far as I'm concerned, I'm super, super excited to move forward from here. I think it's going to be really, really good.
Same.
Yeah, it hasn't even like truly registered for me how different it's going to be to not have to be the one trying to raise the issues from the outside. I don't even like, I'm so unaccustomed to that it's just going to be like, whoa, somebody from the dais is already going to be talking about equity and talking about how do we get community voices involved in these conversations and talking about what does this mean and is this the right path, and like, I don't like, we certainly want to be there to back them up, but it's almost like the work has shifted for the city now in terms of even having to wedge yourself in to introduce the conversation, and that is just so powerful.
It is. Yeah. And I think it's something that strategically the left has to consider too, because I think there's a lot expended energy wise by just having to browbeat, to just having to get our messaging even out there publicly, but having folks who are on the dais, that allows you to shift sort of where we view the power and how we can make ourselves most successfully utilized. I look at a Seattle, a Kashama Savant, socialist city council member, and she has wielded her constituency and the protester class so profoundly to make her just an unquestionable force for that city. Katie and Mai they've got, if they choose to go down that path too. I mean, I just see so much potential here. I can't think more highly of kind of what's just happened, and I don't think I've fully processed it yet either.
It's exciting to have representation, right? Like, people, like, I suppose, like, folks like us are not used to having representatives that actually are looking out for us in a real and meaningful way. And it's like you guys are saying, it feels too good to be true to like have somebody in there who actually cares, like, that's, yep. I don't know. It's like, it's like a dream. It's fantastic.
It's interesting because, like, ideologically, this feels a bit to me like how 2008 felt in terms of like, for me ethnically, right? To have like a Black family in the White House felt very much like, here are people who are having the lived experience that I share. And those times when, even though, politically Obama is so much far to the right of me, but like there were times when he would just speak from my experience and I felt so seen, right? When the things that Michelle Obama would sometimes say about being, being loud because she had something important to say. And it felt so like there's a woman in the White House who knows what it's like to have her hair pressed on a Saturday night before she has to go somewhere special on Sunday, like church or where, like there was just something about that felt so real. And what I was having was like a similar feeling, except there's somebody now in the seats of power in the city I live in who knows what it feels like to be a protester, who knows what it feels like to be up against, who knows what it feels like, to feel like there are things that should be happening in the city that aren't happening, that is deeply critical of the status quo and just the way we've always done things here, that is deeply critical of where power, is perceived to be, to be seated in this place, and wants to shake that up and wants to do something different, right? And it's like, there's something that you just feel so seen. You feel so connected. It changes the way a conversation is had. And so I felt some of that same excitement, but ideologically instead of ethnically this time.
Yeah.
I love it.
Hell yeah. I'm pumped.
I mean, there's a lot happening in the world right now,
Yeah.
but that's a good little sliver for I think a lot of us. But why don't we get started with the show?
Let's do it.
All right.
Voices, the things they said. Voices, some from those dead. All the voices heard. Voices, things we say. Voices, they're in your head. All the voices heard.
Well, hello everyone. You have Kempa
And Skylar.
And Flo. No
and
Shannon.
no
this
Shannon
time.
today. Yeah. Shannon
He
is
needed
taking
a night off.
Yes. So Shannon, do enjoy that night off. I hope you are having a claw, playing with all of your cats, and looking wistfully into your backyard. I don't know. But otherwise,
sounds like a hell of a night.
I don't know what does everyone else do during COVID?
Yeah, I mean, COVID sucks, man. What are you
Yeah,
gonna do?
COVID does suck. Getting some takeout maybe from your favorite place.
There you go. Okay, yeah.
I like sadly staring off into your backyard and drinking by yourself.
Well, wistful is not sad necessarily.
Watching the Kings preseason game. I don't know.
Yeah. The first half, there were some, we don't have to get into sport. This is not a sport
Yeah,
show.
I'm gonna quit this show if we start doing that.
But okay, so let's talk about the real stuff. So some of you might notice that yes, in December we did switch over to our Friday episodes being patron only, but today we figured we'd just open that up because we are in a sort of a pivotal moment during the coronavirus pandemic. There's a lot to cover, both on the state and local level. We are so blessed to have Flo as a co-host, Dr. Flo, epidemiologist, to cover this stuff with us. And I consistently yell at newspapers when they do articles related to public health and do not make them open to the public.
Right, put them behind a paywall. Yeah.
So we figured, why don't we walk the walk as well here, and let's just make this a public episode. Obviously, that's just what we want to do. So let's get into it right away. There's about 4 different facets of the current situation regarding coronavirus here in California and locally that we want to cover. Number 1, well, let me just give some background on kind of where it is numbers wise, because things are pretty bad right now locally, right? It just throughout the US on Wednesday, we saw 3,611 deaths. 379 of those, so that's over 10% of them, were here in California.
I want to actually throw out another statistic to that drives that figure home. On Wednesday, 2.5 people died a minute of coronavirus. 2.5 Americans per minute were dying of coronavirus. It is really, really extreme.
It's it's worse than it's ever been. I mean, we're breaking some really awful records at the moment. Here in California, we had 52,281 new cases in California. Now, there was some overlap from previous days because labs are just getting inundated now with tests and with positive results. And so this is just going to happen. So that's part of it. But it's actually, it's really not much lower than that 52,000 number, actually. So that's, it's scary. Being hit hardest right now is Los Angeles County. LA County, they make up about a quarter of our state's population, 10 million people. They made up 21,000, close to 700 of the positive cases yesterday. So it's scary, it's bad. Here in Sac County, we had 52. We currently over time, since this all began, we have 52,166 cases. We had 1,090 yesterday positives. We have 711 deaths throughout the county, all since March. 12 yesterday. So again, like, this is go time. Some good things are happening, but we have to remember, like, this is the time that you have to be the most careful, that you have to stay home, that you have to protect your people who are older and who are immunocompromised. But let's dive into some good news first then. Flo, last episode, you were talking about how you were cautiously optimistic about the Moderna vaccine. You knew a lot about the Pfizer vaccine already. You already had the paperwork. And I'm sure by now you've read through all of that too. What can you tell us? If there's any updates on Pfizer, please go ahead and give us those. But also, what can you tell us about the new Moderna vaccine that's come out and which the FDA appears to be down with?
Yeah, so when it comes to the Pfizer vaccine, obviously some doses of that are already being administered. It was approved shortly after the panel recommended it by the FDA, and so it is now being administered. I'm sure if you have ventured onto social media or just, been reading up on COVID in general, you've seen reports of some of the first medical professionals who have been vaccinated or in the process of being vaccinated. Some of them have taken to social media either to actually, record that experience or talk about it afterwards and show their arms and show where they got their shots and their stickers and all of that sort of thing. So that has been, really exciting in terms of just watching. And now many of you are going to be seeing people that who are in the healthcare profession who are getting those vaccines. Today, well, today as we're recording it, it'll be yesterday when this goes live. The second panel was held for the Moderna vaccine. And so what happens is there's a select panel of experts that review the evidence and make a recommendation, and then the FDA decides whether or not they're going to make their approval recommendation as well. So it's not until the FDA makes their decision that this becomes official and they can move forward with manufacturing or with shipping doses and beginning to administer it. And so the panel recommended today that they do move forward with the Moderna vaccine as well. The major differences between the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine are how they are stored. So the Pfizer vaccine requires extremely cold temperatures, like -70°C. Whereas the Moderna vaccine can be stored in regular freezers. It also doesn't have to be shipped in quite as large a container. So it means that it can go to places where the other cold storage is going to be an issue. So the goal in terms of distribution by the end of 2020 was supposed to be 20 million doses delivered. And there were some challenges with some of the shipping being fulfilled on the Pfizer vaccine, but it looks like that those are being remedied. So if it's not by the end of this year, literally like December 31st, it'll be shortly thereafter. And if Moderna gets the green light from the FDA, that will be available as well, which will really help with serving, again, some of those more rural places or places where there simply isn't the infrastructure to do really, really cold storage.
Right. And that's like 5 million injected, kind of, pun not intended, into throughout the country by the end of the year, just from Moderna. Yes. So that's, that it just really, it moves us up a whole different level, and it gets a lot of medical professionals, a lot of older folks who are severely, really vulnerable to this. It gets them in a safe place very soon, and so that's kind of exciting, right?
Yes, it is. It is exciting. And, the great thing about what we know thus far, and certainly we're still trying to hold space for the fact that there's a lot that we don't know, but thus far the vaccine appears to be safe, in as far as we've been able to study it. So we don't know long-term effects yet. But in the short term, it appears to be safe. It appears to be equally effective across, gender lines. And there doesn't seem to be, any differences in terms of effectiveness across racial and ethnic groups and in designations like that. Of course, race is not a biological phenomenon, but we do know that it tracks with social phenomena. So it can be an indicator for other lived experiences that could have an epigenetic response, which is basically saying that the environment interacts with your body and can shape how effective things are not in you. Not that people of different races by nature would experience a different.
Right.
We're all part of the human race, and the diversity we've seen between races is usually much smaller than the diversity we even see within people who are of the same race. So I'd just like to point that out.
Poverty is a big determinant on health outcomes, as you talk about a lot.
Poverty, stress,
and poverty falls also along race lines, right? Indigenous
because of
folks,
caste, exactly.
Black folks,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. Stress is another one. So, air quality is another thing that can change your epigenetic profile. So where you live is going to determine what the quality of air is. It's going to determine your susceptibility to things. So all of those are the ways that race plays out. It's a proxy for all of those other experiences. And it's a social designation that talks about the way that your lived experience may be shaped. So we don't thus far see any differences along some of those lines, which is really promising. As we mentioned last time, there are, side effects. The primary side effects seem to be, soreness at the site of injection, maybe some lethargy over the course of several days. For some people, maybe headache. They seem to be minor symptoms and similar ones to the shingles vaccine right now. So that's what most people are experiencing. There have been some instances of Bell's palsy, which we mentioned on the last episode of the show, is simply just, it makes your face look like you've had a stroke, but you haven't, and it goes away usually over the course of several weeks. And that seems to be the most extreme of the side effects. And we haven't even again determined whether or not it's directly related to the vaccine or something else. So, but they're investigating that.
Okay, and the results of this one I've seen, it almost appears like, astoundingly, that the results are somehow better than the Pfizer results in the tests. Didn't I also see that it works pretty effectively across age groups?
Yes,
and
that
there were everyone who was inoculated, there were no deaths of those who were inoculated, even though there might have been a few severe cases.
Yes, there have been no deaths. It does work equally across, as I mentioned, race or ethnicity, gender, and age. And it does appear that the protection from the vaccine starts pretty soon after people get vaccinated. So they're still recommending 2 doses, but it seems like you're beginning to get some protection even before you get the second dose and pretty shortly after you get the first dose.
I mean, that's
but there's not enough data yet to come to a clear conclusion that is the case. But the data are indicating that you're beginning to get protection early on.
I'm worried that my sweet summer childness is wearing off on both of you. Should we have some trepidation, and what should that look like?
We certainly should. As I've been very clear about saying, we need to be honest about what we don't know. And as much as we're saying here, this vaccine has only been, in trials for months as opposed to years.
Right.
And so, so we do have to take into account like what happens, there are long-term effects that can happen, from vaccines. And so we don't need to downplay the possibility pregnancy. We don't currently see any indication that that's happening, but we also it hasn't been around long enough to be able to talk about long-term effects. And again, the other thing that I will frequently mention, because, I'm in the age group and a lot of people my age and younger are of, people who are of reproductive age, we don't know enough to be able to say if this vaccine is safe during pregnancy, if this vaccine has any implications, there in terms of, future pregnancies and things like that. And so those are just unknowns. I can't say it's safe. I can't say it's unsafe. That's just a big question mark. So yes, we should have some skepticism, and we should be really paying close attention to what we learn as this vaccine is now being rolled out to the wider population.
And there's also no data on 17 years old and younger, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
We didn't add people who were under 17. And right now the trials, I believe, have 12 to 17. So I don't know that we have kids under 12 in any of the vaccine trials yet. I'm assuming that's probably coming. So for now, we really can't say anything about, non-adults either. And that was actually one of the points of contention for the Pfizer vaccine was, some of the people who seem to be voting against, they didn't actually have a conversation afterwards. Usually they will say if they voted against why, but in the course of the conversation leading up to the vote, several expressed concerns about authorizing the vaccine for 16 and up because the data for the 16 and 17-year-olds weren't there. So that's just another, consideration is when people are asking, well, can I get my kids vaccinated? Schools reopening, all of those things. Again, the answer is we don't know. And we just need to be honest about that.
Yeah. Although, if you do look at the numbers, it's less likely, it's severely less likely unless a child is immunocompromised that it, coronavirus would be fatal for them.
Right.
There might be long-term effects, things like that.
Right.
But for the most part, a lot of this and a lot of these results we're looking at, they are seriously promising for our most vulnerable populations.
Flo, do you mind if I ask, one of the things that I do not know the answer to this question, and you are exactly the right person to ask, like obviously going into this, and once everybody who's essential has been vaccinated and that's going, and it begins to become available to the general population, obviously we're going to have like a considerable number of people who will refuse the vaccine, right? And like my question is how big of an issue is that for like everybody else, and what kind of numbers, like what kind of percentages of people who refuse the vaccine, like where does that start to get scary, and where is it not a big deal in those terms?
Sure. So part of the reason why we've been so concerned about the number of people who in polling have said that they're not willing to get the vaccine is because typically you want in order to achieve herd immunity, which I'll define in a moment, you want to have at least 70% of the population vaccinated, preferably higher than that. So for something like, flu, which is subject to lots of changes every year, which is why we recommend an annual vaccine, you would want something much higher because you're more likely to be able to stop the spread, right? Unfortunately, it's going to be very hard to ever achieve that because it's something people have to do every single year. But typically, and 70% has been the goal since, the vaccine began to be developed. What herd immunity basically means is that you have so many people vaccinated, or what we consider to be out of the risk pool in a community, that is really hard for an outbreak to begin. So, we talked about these super spreader events. The only reason those are able to happen is because everybody in the population in January was in the risk pool. None of us had any immunity. That is harder to do if more people have immunity. So for example, let's pretend I'm unvaccinated and I go to your 50-person wedding, and let's say I'm unvaccinated for measles, and I go to your wedding and I have measles. I am far less likely to be able to spread measles around your wedding, because if your wedding, especially if it's adults only, most adults in the US have been vaccinated for measles. So I'm going to get there and there may be one person I end up infecting, and that's about it. It's much harder to spread because there's nobody in the risk pool. Everybody's been vaccinated. If I go there and I have COVID and nobody in the room has been vaccinated, it's very easy. And that's we saw the case in that was reported in the LA Times where, one wedding, 55 people, 176 people end up getting COVID. So that includes lots of people who weren't at the wedding,
Right.
and 7 people ended up dead, right? And so that can only happen because of that. So you want to have as many people taken out of the risk pool as possible so that when an outbreak starts to happen, it stops quickly because it reaches a vaccinated person and it goes nowhere. The other thing the other reason why you often want it to be higher than 70% is because there's something called vaccine failure. And basically what that means is that you did get vaccinated, and for whatever reason, you're in that 5% right now that it seems to be in the Moderna and the Pfizer trials, that just simply, for whatever reason, the vaccine just didn't work for you.
Right.
And we don't know who those people are until they end up contracting the virus. And so it's important that we overshoot a little bit so that we also account for the people who were vaccinated, but it just didn't work.
You mentioned surveys earlier on and said that they looked concerning. What are the numbers in the surveys on what does it look like so far as far as people who are willing to take it and people who aren't?
Normally, I'm glad you asked that question, Skylar, but I'm not glad you asked that question here because they're really daunting. So the Public Policy Institute of California did a survey. I'd have to check to see the exact date on it, but it was sometime this fall. And it turns out that only about 60% of Californians were willing to get the vaccine, and that the numbers varied by race and ethnicity. So Latinos were only about 50%. Only about 50% were willing. And among the Black population, only just below 30%. I think it was 29% were willing. Yeah. And what was interesting though is when they just like broke people down by like political affiliation and things like that, people were equally skeptical. It wasn't as if, Republicans were more than Democrats or, anything like that. You just kind of generally saw people saying, this feels fast. I'm just not sure. I just don't know if I want to do this. Now, the question will be, how many of them are going to remain skeptical in 6 months, right? Or 4 or 5 months when the vaccine is likely to become available to them? I think that a lot of people will change their minds once they see it rolled out, once they see their own doctors and the healthcare professionals in their lives getting vaccinated and doing okay.
And people they trust in their community.
Exactly.
Like maybe your pastor, your priest, your rabbi, I think a lot of us, we trust one another by proxy. And when you see someone you trust deeply and whose word you trust, I think you can come around to something like that. But I mean, yeah. Again, I guess I'm in summer child mode again, but those numbers are daunting.
They are.
I think 70% is reachable, especially as you're seeing folks feel safe again, and they feel safe because they've been vaccinated, and then folks who haven't been vaccinated are going to the hospital. It starts to click,
I think, the other side of this that is a more grisly take on it is that we're in the middle of a spike right now. It's not going to get better. We're about to have Christmas and New Year's. So, that's going to be like huge numbers on the board. And I think one thing that is, I would have to imagine is likely in convincing people that they should take vaccines is having people they know or their loved ones get it and die. And there's going to be a lot of those people in the next month or two, which is kind of an awful way to convince people to get the vaccine. But I would expect to be effective nonetheless.
Yeah. You're probably right about that. I would say, the other thing, Dave, you mentioned like trust in the community. I do think those trusted messengers are going to be really important. I actually have a friend that was going to say whose husband said, I'm not getting this vaccine until you and Dr. Fauci get it. Not either or, both of you. That's when I'm willing to get it. So I think it's really funny. But yeah, I think the trust factor is going to be a big one. I think the other piece of it is that people are also creatures of convenience. And so similarly to the way that mandatory school vaccines have made it so that the vaccination rate is much higher than it probably would be otherwise, I think if they're required for you to be able to travel, I think a lot of people are going to be itching to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think there are ways to not get into the mandating, because I think mandating will make people very skeptical and lacking in trust. But I think if you make it inconvenient for people once the vaccine has a little more time, if you start making it more, I shouldn't say inconvenient, I should say you start making it more convenient for people to do what they want to, like, hey, you can travel and you don't have to go and get 6 tests in order to do it. And you don't have to quarantine for 14 days. And you can now come back into the movies and you can come back and start doing the activities people want to do. I think that incentivizes people to get the vaccine as well.
Yeah. Let's move on. We spent a good amount of time on that. We can actually, I'm sure this next one, I'm not sure how much there is to say on this, but it's very important. California, as we all know, is dealing with a very severe spike in cases. I mentioned that Los Angeles County is deeply affected, probably more deeply affected than the rest of the state. So in Southern California, and Gavin Newsom and the California government sort of broke California up into different regions. One of the regions was Southern California, and they just realized today, I believe it was, well, today being Thursday, the December 17th, that there are 0% ICU beds available in Southern California. What does that mean? Does that portend anything for other parts of the state? How do we respond to something like this?
It is pretty bad, right? So 0% means that we're in the middle of a spike and we just simply don't have enough beds. And so that's terrifying. I can't make anybody feel any better about that. It's also terrifying that they're not the only ones. The Central Valley was at 0% for a while. I think they're at now up to just under 1%.
0.7, 0.3, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And then I know in Northern California, we've been hovering, it's somewhere between the 10 and just below 15. It's scary because it means that there's not even anybody else in the region to be able to take the overflow of cases if you're in Southern California. And so I know we talked about 10 million people being in LA County, but in the entire region, there are about 20 million people. And so when you're saying in the region, there are 0% beds, it does not bode well. So, the best thing to do is for everybody to really, this is the time, as Dave said, to hunker down, to not take that thing that you think is slightly low risk, just a couple of friends, we're just going to be together. Just don't do it right now.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing about the ICU beds being unavailable too, is I think like a lot of people will hear that and think like, okay, well, if you don't get COVID, you're okay. But that means there's no ICU beds for anybody in LA County. If you get into a car accident, if you have a heart attack, just the regular everyday reasons that people need an ICU bed, they're not available to those people either,
Correct.
So it's a double whammy.
And that's
heart
why
attacks and things haven't gone away during this time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why during the COVID era, it's not just people who've died of COVID that will be partially the determinant. They won't be 100% of why we have a spike in deaths this year.
Right.
We will have a spikes in deaths in many different spaces because things that were treatable in other scenarios won't be treated today because our doctors, our nurses, our EMTs are
overrun.
So overrun, and there's just nothing they can do.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess there's not much more to say on that.
Yeah,
issue.
Everybody hunker down, buckle up, and stay in your fucking house.
Yeah. I mean, everybody. It's
Please. Just please.
So I wanted to talk also about Flo, you talked previously with Erica Smith at the LA Times on how the Black community was sort of, in many regards, not trusting, nervous about trusting the U.S. government to give them vaccinations for COVID, very often citing the Tuskegee experiment. Now there is talk today, and we've known that this conversation was going to come up, but there's talk today about historical injustice being a determinant for who we give injections to, or at the very least, who ends up first in line.
Right,
there.
who we prioritize initially. Yeah.
And this could mean, indigenous folks living in California. This could mean the Black community, the Latino community that is just being really just ravaged by this virus. Can you talk about why that's important, and then B, there's some complications. This is a nuanced conversation, and let's dive into that.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for us to think about, just like we had the initial conversation of who should get the vaccine first, and obviously our healthcare professionals make the most sense, right? Not only are they at the highest risk, but they also are desperately needed in order to be able to make sure we can take care of the other people who get sick. Right. So that's really a no-brainer. And similarly, right after them are the people who are in essential professions that we need to keep open. People, who are keeping, us afloat and running during this time. And then when we get beyond that, we started to talk about the people who are at greatest risk. And so that conversation naturally turns to the oldest people over 65, as well as, our racial and ethnic minorities in the United States, because our Black, our Latinx, and our indigenous folks are at the highest risk. And so that's important to call out. And so that's part of the reason why this is happening. And a lot of places, I think almost 20 states are looking at using, a health equity index or some sort of index to be able to really think about, where they need to, whether it's a social vulnerability index, a way to be able to capture, who is suffering most from this virus once we get beyond professional sectors. The challenge with that, as you rightly mentioned, is what comes up with trust, right? The U.S. government doesn't have a great track record of prioritizing any of the groups I've named. And in fact, often when a policy was directed at Black or indigenous or Latinx folks, it was something scary and terrifying. And so rightly, even as people are trying now to remedy, these historic injustices, people are going, wait a damn minute here. You now all of a sudden you care about us? You didn't care about us this whole pandemic, but now all of a sudden this vaccine, it's important, right? And so there are real questions.
And you lose someone's trust, you can't just regain it overnight.
Right. Correct. And certainly not when you want to inject people with something.
Right. I was going to say, I think with like a lot of indigenous folks, it runs even deeper than that, given the history that like indigenous people have with this government intentionally spreading terrible diseases, throughout their populations that decimated these populations. It's not, it's 100% reasonable for people to be like really skeptical about this.
Yeah, and if anybody's ever read, I mean, I'm a little hesitant to mention it, but also I want people to be informed. Like, Medical Apartheid is a great book, and it really gets into the details of just all of the awful things that have happened, in this country. I mean, I think about, obstetrics and gynecology and how that was on the backs of Black and Native women who were experimented on with no anesthetic and just were used as, essentially as living cadavers in some ways to be able to learn about how female reproductive organs worked, right, and what they could and could not do. And it's horrifying to read those accounts of just what happened to people. So there is a sordid history here when it comes to the protection, especially when it comes to the medical establishment. And so Dr. Tiffany Johnson said it really clearly that nobody cared about Black women showing up in emergency rooms postpartum and dying because they weren't taken seriously, right? Like, we have some major issues that we can point out for the well-earned mistrust. And so now all of a sudden you're supposedly wanting to do right. And I think for a lot of folks, they really do want, there are people who are in these organizations who are like, look, we want to get this right. We understand that there are equity issues. We understand everyone's not suffering equally, and we want to get these vaccines out. But there also has to be a consideration for how that's going to look, because I think most of the communities are asking, the quintessential "I don't trust you" question, which I love to say is a cookout question, which is, who made this potato salad, right? Like, I don't know you, I don't trust you, and I'm not eating anything until I found out who made this potato salad. And and there's so much that goes deep into that, which is, what were your intentions? What were your ingredients? What do you want? Why are you here? Who invited you? Right? Like, there's so much wrapped up in that question. And that's honestly what people are asking.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why I think the approach that you introduced to us last episode, that you were going to share all of your trepidation as a public health professional and all of your thoughts and concerns, and the history very well, and so like you're I think it's very important to have someone like you to say, like, listen, I'm right here with you as we go through this process.
And wanting to be very vulnerable and honest with people, that I'm literally right here with you, because I am I just turned 38. I am a woman of reproductive age. I have not made, any final determinations about whether I do or do not want to have children. I recognize how biology works, and that if I have to make a decision, it has to be pretty quickly. And so I'm literally looking at this vaccine going, what do we know, and do I feel comfortable taking it? So I don't say that lightly when I say, like, I'm coming at this really from the perspective of, I'm not going to try to sell anybody on it, and I'm really looking into it because I have as much of a vested interest as anybody else.
Yeah. I think like trepidation aside, and obviously like I said earlier, like, everybody's skepticism is warranted, but there's also something exciting, I think, about, like, if this can be done in a way that is just and comes in good faith, then it is like an opportunity to pay some much needed reparations and bring some justice to a situation that has not had any in a really long time. And that, like, I don't know, like, I think the implication of that is exciting to me, to get some work done in that area, because honestly, it's really, really long overdue, and a lot of people have good shit coming to them,
And honestly, if it goes well, like, this could be a real trust building exercise, right? Like, it's one of those things where even if people don't take it immediately, if the vaccine proves to be working and people are doing well, it will say, like, oh, wow, you were really going to share the cure with us. I mean, cure in quotes, but you were going to share the cure with us first. That was really nice of you. I didn't take it because I didn't trust you, but it looks like it's for those people. So, all right, what else are you selling here? Right. So I think it is a trust building opportunity. Fingers crossed, provided that nothing catastrophic happens with it, right? Like, somebody on in one of my group chats was like, I don't want to say this, too loudly, because I don't want the conspiracy theorists to get a hold of it, but I don't want to see commercials in 10 years talking about, if you were vaccinated between 2000 and 2000, and you developed mesothelioma, please call, right? Like, and I think that's what some people's concern is that, like, we don't know until much later.
Right.
Yeah.
Can we bring this local?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, something happened this week at Sac County.
You guys, something wonderful has happened.
Let's talk about it. So, as we all know, and we've all discussed, the county had $65 million left of CARES Act money. This is the coronavirus money that the federal government had given to all the different continuums of care throughout the country. But we have to spend it by the end of the year.
Right. And not allocate it. We actually have to spend the money.
Yes.
Yeah.
and the county has been running around with their hair on fire trying to figure out how to do that. And they came up with something pretty creative this week. And basically what this creative method was, and keep in mind a little context here, this is the same county that completely lost all of our trust.
Yep.
All of everyone in this county.
Like extremely recently.
Way to bring the motif full circle.
Yeah.
Recently.
Talking about community trust.
Right.
Talking about being screwed over, right?
So like, you know, they're, and I'll get to it. They're asking us to trust them on something, but you can't just like ask people to trust you when you fucking lost it totally. So anyway, the county, when they got their first $181 million of CARES Act money, they immediately gave $105 million of it to our violent, murderous sheriff's department, as opposed to actually helping people in our county fight coronavirus and protect themselves and their lives. So there's $65 million left in CARES Act money. They're thinking, what do we do? What do we do? And they want to get creative. They want to shuffle the money around so the feds don't
Yeah.
back.
They're thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
What have we not tried yet?
And so the five Einsteins sitting on the dais decide, here's what we'll do. We'll take 50 million of that 65 million and give it to the sheriff.
Yeah. Let's fucking go.
Let's go.
As well as to what's the other one? Probation department. So like again, just more law and order bullshit.
Yep.
We'll shuffle the money in there, and we'll have them promise to give the money back to our public health officials.
And the deal, they're going to take it from like a different fund or something. So they're going to give them this 49 million, but they're going to take 49 million from like some kind of general fund or something along those lines.
Yes. This is all funky math. And this is why it actually, I know there were a lot of people who were like, hey, people's budget and others, why don't you say something about this earlier? Well, in part because we had our 2-day retreat over the weekend. And so we were doing a lot of like long-term planning and just, and so, you know, our time was limited, but also because we were really going back and forth about how to handle this. Because on one hand, we recognize that public health is critically underfunded and that they have not gotten enough of the general fund allocation. And it is unlikely, dealing with these 5 people, that they are going to get more in the new year to be able to help with vaccine distribution and the other things that are going to be necessary, especially given that this peak is likely to continue through the next 3 weeks, which means we are going to have, you know, thousands, you know, more in the way of cases. So that was the first consideration.
I think we should give the Einstein 5 a chance.
Oh, okay. All right. Look at you.
Have they heard us before? I don't know.
Yes, they've been extremely trustworthy.
Right. Totally.
The whole time so far. Why would they stop that now?
Consideration, right? And so on the record, and I think this speaks to, you know, I don't know Ann Edwards well, but I thought that even her framing
That's
of
the interim CEO of the county.
Yes. And her framing of this was very clear. She said, this is not ideal. This is not, you know, a popular or, you know, the way that I want to handle this, but because the only entity in the entire county that gets this much money from the general fund is either probation or the sheriff's department. They are the only CARES approved entities that we can actually use to play this shell game. And so part of what a lot of us made comments. We were like, mathematically, I don't have a problem with what's happening here. Principally, though, I do, because principally, first of all, you should have given more of this money to public health up front, so they could have done things so we wouldn't be in the position we're in right now.
Right.
Principally, you should have given money to the people who were outside banging on the windows and doors and getting the supervisors meeting shut down because their businesses are hurting, or because they're not able to pay the mortgages on their homes or the rents on their businesses or their homes, right? That's why people are out there. Now, some of them also don't want to wear masks and don't want to shut down, and we have some philosophical differences there. But the root cause of why they're upset, I can agree, is that you as a county did not do what you should have done to be able to protect them. And that's a problem. And so had that happened up front, we wouldn't be in this position in the first place. But now you're coming to us with this like little switcheroo thing you want to do, and we're rightly skeptical. But they have agreed to put in writing and to actually to create a separate little fund there to show what's going on with the CARES Act dollars, so we can hold them accountable to the fact that the exact same amount is going to come out of the Sheriff's General Fund and go to public health for the purposes. They also mentioned that there are only about $7 or $8 million that are actually unspent. The rest are encumbered, which means that they have, for example, identified the thing that they're going to buy with it, but right. that entity hasn't invoiced them yet, or the payment hasn't quite been made, but it is allocated. So it's not as if public health was sitting on this funding. But part of the reason it was slow tracked was because Nav Gill wasn't approving those invoices and doing the things that he could have, even after August, and he was the former CEO of the county, and he wasn't approving those even after public health got some of the money.
Love it. So I heard, and I didn't watch this meeting, I heard that there was a bit of condescension from the dais.
Totally.
Let's hear about that. And I kind of was expecting that to happen. I was anticipating that because, there was, I'll just I did a little push on it the night before because I was like, these motherfuckers better not try anything. And so a few people, push this out there on social to let folks know that, be sure to call the county and let them know, don't fuck with this money the way that you fuck with money all the time, the way that you gave $105 million in CARES Act money to the sheriff's department. I kind of was anticipating that they would be like, whoa, hey, baby, we were never going to do that. What are you talking about? So right. What did they end up saying? What did they end up doing?
So in the beginning, before public comment was opened, the members on the dais were basically saying, people seem to be upset about this, but it seems to me like they're not quite understanding that we're not actually giving this money to the sheriffs, that we're taking the money from the sheriff. We're doing this to preserve the money for public health. And we're not, and I was just kind of like, so I even adjusted my public comments when I made them, because I was just like, I was like, if the first allocation to the sheriff and probation hadn't happened, this one would be less worrisome. Let's be very clear here that the people who are saying they don't trust you and they're skeptical, were saying that because you have not proven yourself to be trustworthy and you have earned our skepticism. And then I was like, and secondly, we are paying attention. We understand how a swap works. Don't talk down to us as if we're confused and don't quite get how math works. We get how math works. We're saying this is troubling for all of the reasons why it's necessary, even. Even if we get away from just the money in, money out, it's why is the sheriff the only entity that gets this much in the way of general fund? That means public health doesn't have $50 million that it's getting from the general fund, at all.
Right.
It's only a few $1 million that go to public health through the general fund. The rest is coming from the feds and other places. That is a problem. That speaks to the values of what we spend our general fund dollars on.
It's profoundly galling how dumb they think people are.
It feels to me like just the county's all right, so here's how it's going to go. I give you $20. Now you're going to give me 2 10s. I'm going to give you back 2 5s and 5 1s, right? And then you're going to give me back 3 of those ones. I'm going to give you back 12 quarters. People are just why are we doing it like this?
Right. 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 It's not that we don't understand, it's that we don't like it.
Right.
And that we actually think that in addition, I mean, I know this isn't like a politically viable thing to have happen right now because of who sits on the dais. But what I would rather have seen happen is let public health spend this money, spend as much of this money as they could as quickly as possible between now and December 31st, and then also take $50 million from the sheriff's department without any replacement. That's what I would like to have seen.
Literally take that 65 million, help everyone pay rent.
Yeah, and just take it out, and that's it. I don't know. The sheriff just doesn't get that money.
Right, or open up warming centers for the next like 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Correct. You just don't get that money.
And that's how not creative they are. They live in a gray world at the county building. It's bizarre. It's like even the way they talk in that building. It's like I feel my brain shutting down at these meetings. I don't know. Is there anything else to add to this? I
got to tell you, I'm thinking about it right now. I'm loving it.
Man.
This is normally the part of the show for our listeners who are now getting sort of a behind the scenes glimpse at our paywall episodes. This is normally so for our Patreon subscribers, instead of trying to like pitch you on being patrons for us on Patreon, we take this time just to tell you how cool everyone is and congratulate people on their savvy financial decisions.
Should we give them a taste of that? Like, well, this is one of the episodes. This one's just for the real ones.
Yeah.
And we do not respect any of our listeners who only listen to the replays. We dislike them.
This happens every week, folks.
Thinking about them
every Friday.
And those of you who will put down $5 or more per month, I just want to say I'm groveling at your feet, and I worship you, and I have a little altar set up for all 120 of you in my apartment, and it's kind of disturbing, but that's how much I care about how much you support the work we do.
Yeah. But because many of you are not Patreon supporters, Dave, where does a lot of this good work happen, and where could someone, if they wanted to find more of it, go to do so?
Lovely question. So the centerpiece of all that we do is in a little corner of the internet called voicesrivercity.com. I would recommend poking through there. There's a lot of amazing writing there from back in the day. We launched in 2017. News, arts coverage back then, great community essays. We have a couple of those interspersed in the last year as well. We also have the SAC Follows the Money project, which basically, it shows you all the money that Steve Hansen took from the real estate industry before Katie knocked him off that dais. And now we have one fewer peon to the real estate industry on Sac City Council. So I think projects like that have been really important and informative and fun. I think the fun part is a big part of it too. Like, I think to some people this seems like work and like wonky stuff, but it's like, I don't know. Everything we do, we're just trying to help people, right? It's like, look at the assholes giving these people money. Shouldn't that stop? And people are like, yeah. And then we all get together and we work to make that stop, right? And I think that's really fun. And these are things that really listeners, you are centerpieces to this, and we learn from you. So thank you for that. But the current iteration of Voices River City is really the podcast. We're on well into our hundreds now, episode 116, and we will only go beyond. I will say our first year back since we relaunched the podcast, we have over 20,000 downloads in the last year, and surprising everyone, on YouTube we have like almost 8,000 views, and so it's just That one I never would have guessed. So we're growing fast, and it's fun to see, and it's fun to be a part of this town and this state and this conversation. So expect more of the same in 2021. And if you could become a patron, as low as $5 a month, that's patreon.com/Voices River City. We are on Facebook, Voices River City, Twitter at Voices River City, Instagram at Voices River City. Like I said, YouTube, Voices River City. I am personally on Twitter at Kempa, YOUKNOWKEMPA.
You can find me at Guillotine for You. That's Guillotine, the number 4, YOU.
And you can find me at Flojaune, FLOJAUNE. And Shannon can be found at Shan ND Stevens.
Real quick, because we sort of gave him the pitch, but not the whole pitch. I wanted to make it very clear that if you are considering becoming a Patreon subscriber to this show, it means you get something for your money. You get double the amount of episodes. Plus you get access to our backlog of previously paywalled content. Mm-hmm. So right now we do, right now, everybody gets to listen to Tuesdays, and then our Patreon subscribers also get a new episode on Fridays. Well worth the $5. If you ask me, I am a $5 a month subscriber myself. So I put my money where my mouth is on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's enough of that. Thank you for giving the show a listen. Until next time, we want you to know that we love you, and we want you to stay safe.
Stay sane.
Stay healthy.
And stay the fuck away from me. No, like, just stay away from everyone. Stay at home.
Yeah.
It's really bad right now.
You can come to my house. I'm just kidding. I just wanted to see what Flo would do.
because Tyler, I feel like the next thing you're gonna say is like, I have my own ICU. I'll cut you open. I'll intubate you. I got it. And I'm just gonna be like, I can't with you all. And
I got an ICU couch right over here. We're ready to go.
Speaking of trust, I trust him with my life. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, hell yeah.
I've gone under Skylar's knife 4 or 5 times, and I came out great.
Mm-hmm.
Please, no one. Don't try this at home. Whatever that disclaimer is that you have to do. Please
all right, guys. Well, this is Dr. Skylar signing off. But for real, we're done.
All right, goodbye.